Hello everybody, please take your seats as soon as you can. Today we're going to talk about Kendo UI. Kendo UI is available for React, for Vue, for jQuery and Angular. So I'm going to cover the Angular bit. So I hope you're Angular developers, or about to be, because otherwise you're in the wrong talk. Alright. My name is Chris Noring. You might have heard me speak yesterday about RxJS. I work for McKinsey. Chris_Noring is my Twitter tag, so if you've got any questions or comments afterwards, this is where you will reach me in the easiest way possible. Let's begin. I always start with these slides. I start to build up a kind of motivation piece why you guys shouldn't fall asleep right away, right? So it's important for me that you understand why we are talking about this and why it matters. We have all been here. We have been in a tight time crunch. You have a salesman on your company that says, oh yeah, by the way, in 3 weeks you need to be done with this, and you haven't even started. And they have promised the sky to this customer, of course, like maps, graphs, God knows what, and you're trying to scramble to Google and say, help me, I need some kind of open source or paid for library depending on your budget, right? You as a developer need to deliver. But of course, there is some functionality that's hard to write in that time crunch. I mean, given time, right? Given a few months or even a year, you can probably replicate most of the Kendo framework, but in reality, you don't have that time. You would love this nice challenge of building a graph library from scratch. That's why you're developers, right? But depending on you or your team, you might not actually be a pro in both front-end and back-end, and for that reason, these kind of component libraries exist, right? Because they're not telling you you need to be a ninja in CSS, or you need to be a ninja in JavaScript, or C# or wherever you are in the stack. And of course, tech support. That's an interesting one, right? You turn to this open source framework and they try to do a PR. Or for some other reason, you have this open source project and the core maintainers are not there anymore. It's kind of abandonware after 2 years, and you're like, not good for me or my team or my customer. So, a paid for library will offer some kind of support, right? And that's usually why we turn to them. Or you might want a feature that's not there anymore. As hard as it pains me to say this, but most of the business world expects you to solve business problem and not tech problems. You love tech problems, that's why you're developers. But it's going to be this project manager who tells you that, well, we're trying to solve a business problem here. And based on that, it makes sense to buy these components. For the company, of course, not if you're by yourself. So let's look at an overview of what we have out there that's possible to use with Angular already. That's free. Angular material, of course, new release a few weeks ago. Onsen, did you guys try Onsen? Yeah, they're not super famous. Bootstrap, everyone tried Bootstrap at some point in time, right? So there are a few good options, and I would say they're very good for simpler applications, even medium-sized. But of course, here are the paid ones, or some of them. Infragistics, this one you will probably use if you're in the business long enough. Kendo UI, which one I'm talking about. AG Grid, super good grid, right? But it's just a grid. Oh. Yeah, so as you can see, there are different price levels here, and probably you as developers are like, yeah, I don't care about money, it's my project manager who has the budget anyway. So, but there is a difference. And especially when you want to use them is when you need this more functionality, and maybe you want themes even, right? You don't have all the time in the world for making your own themes. So this is what Kendo UI looks like from high level, right? We have different groups. We've got buttons, inputs, drop-downs, charts, grids, and so on. I'm not going to mention each and every single one, but you get an idea that there are a lot of categories. Inside of each category, there are a number of components. I will scratch the surface today. I will mention like one component from each, pretty much. Otherwise, we'd be here for hours, and I think you want your coffee, right? Yeah, you need it now, I think. So what do we want out of a component framework? Input controls, date, numbers, and so on, right? How many want a map control? Yeah, quite a few hands. I'm doing a poll for progress. Themes, how many want themes? One hand, probably a CSS guy, right? Nope. Yeah, of course, that's the problem. You're not a CSS guy, so that's why you want the theme. So graphs, we expect graphs, otherwise, what's the point? Otherwise we might turn to high charts and, have to build the other stuff ourselves. It's nice with exports like Excel or PDF or whatever file format. Custom drawing, anyone wants custom drawing? All right, one hand. Half a hand, I think. So how do we work with Kendo normally? We have a workflow, of course. The first thing we need to do is to install a theme. This is before we try to build any kind of application. Otherwise, it looks very, white on the screen. So you need to install the npm library, of course, that you need for the group. And of course, you need to import the component modules that you need and register those in the ng module. And of course, in the template, you need to refer to the Kendo components that you're about to use. So I would say steps 1, 2, 4, you will repeat for each and every component. Step 1, you do once per application, pretty much, unless you change your mind midway and say, yeah, I like material design better than Bootstrap, so let's change everything. That's happened. So. Themes. Default theme. It works, it ain't pretty, so therefore there are more. There is the Bootstrap theme that we all know and maybe love or hate, I'm not sure which. Material design, this is the cool theme that everyone's been talking about for the last several years. So that's also available and out of the box. How do we import it? How do we use it? So there are different levels here. Otherwise you can have a link tag, or you can on component level refer to it through style URLs. You can use it in your build pipeline with Sass, or if you just refer to it in raw here in the Angle CLI JSON file, you can just point it out. And of course, changing between themes is very easy. Just change this line virtually. And of course, little demo, right? We don't like PowerPoints that much. So let's return to code. Hopefully that works. It seems to be working. And we are here. And let's pray to the demo god that this works, right? There, it's loading, loading, loading. And let's see where we're at. So, thinking, building, wasting some more time. 90%, waiting for local host. Come on. Yeah, and there we have some Kendo components. So of course, little Kendo guy, we expect that. We have some graphs, we have a few buttons. All right, okay. So we see a bunch of data here, we see a bunch of other components that we would like to use. Calendars, of course. But the demo we were trying to do was to show how easy it is with themes. So let's go back to this little guy and see what theme we have. We see here that we have the Bootstrap. I think it's called Material, if I remember correctly. For safety's sake, let's just recompile this. And meanwhile, we check in node modules to see whether it's actually called Material. That's a good start, I think. Kendo Angular. And try to rerun you. Looks a bit different, right? We have some nice shadows to our components here, especially buttons. So you see it's pretty easy to change themes while at it. You might not do it more than once per project, but still, it's nice that it's easy, right? At least something is. Let's go back to the talk, like so. Yeah, we've all seen this meme, I think. This guy is very adamant on us pushing the buttons, so let's continue with buttons. Makes sense. We have different kinds of buttons, of course, in this category. We have a normal button, which has default looks, primary looks, it can be disabled and so on. We have something called a button group. Here in this button group we have different options that go together. So this might be, for example, a representation of different colors or something within the same category. We got something called drop-down button. This one is interesting, so we make a selection in this drop-down and it will execute this action, regardless of what this is, right? Could be a routing to another page somewhere. And of course we got something called split button. So these two look exactly the same, but there is a difference. The main difference here is, if you check this guy, if we try to click my profile here that seems pre-selected, nothing will actually happen. If we go to this guy and press this paste here, it will actually do something. So there is a fine difference. And installing usage is pretty easy. We got Kendo Angular buttons as a dependency, but also this Kendo Angular I10N and animations. You will see that in most cases the two lower ones will actually be recommended or they are a dependency to most things Kendo. And of course we have the buttons module that we can import. Should be said though that we are, in this case, because we have a lot of sub-buttons, a lot of different buttons, when we import buttons we get all of them. And that might actually create a bigger bundle that we had in mind. So for that reason we can have an alternate import syntax where we just take the button we want. So depending on if you know that you're going to use all of them or just the one, right? The bottom one is a better approach to begin with. It looks like this, bunch of code. So pretty much we have different ways of creating buttons, and the common theme here is that we have something within the buttons. We have some kind of image. It could be an icon from an icon library. In this case it's from Kendo's own library, or it could be an image URL to somewhere else on the web, but it could also be an icon class. And as you can see here, above the button here we have a link rel to a font awesome. So we're using those icons. That's nice, that's customizable, and as you can see here in the bottom, this is what the rendering will look like when we try out these different options. And of course, even if we are on Bootstrap or default theme, we might actually have gotten used to this ripple effect. You know the material design, when we click a button it just goes. If you want that effect, there is actually a library. So we can apply that even though it might look like Bootstrap. So I don't know how much you care about animations, but it's a pretty neat one. I mean, if you're buying the package anyway, why not, right? The only thing you need to do and remember when you are using it is that you make sure that you have a div container and the directive Kendo ripple container. So that will make anything really have that ripple effect. Charts. Who loves charts? Few hands. There are a lot of chart types. There are areas, there are bar, box, plot, bubble, and so on. As you can see, if you need a chart, most likely you will find the kind that you need. And we got something called sparkline. Now these are very special kind of graphs because they're not big graphs like you're used to. They're more like small graphs to the side of whatever you're trying to display, right? So in this case it could be a button or it could be a text, and next to it is this mini representation of it. Almost like a heads-up display from a game, right? So it could be nice in some circumstances to show these mini. And of course we got the third type, which is a stock chart, and this one is about visualizing price. So very financial heavy thing. How do we use that? Kendo Angular charts and a bunch of dependencies. As I was saying, the ones from buttons are shown here again, the Intel I10 and so on, and also a library called Kendo Drawing that I will talk about, I think, the very last thing. And animations, of course. Once we have that, we have the same options as with buttons. We can import all of them or just a dedicated one. So it's really up to us how we want to handle it. It's good with the options. Alright, charts, exciting, right? So imagine here that we have a series of data and we can easily just plot that on the screen, and of course it's responsive. Regardless of mobile or desktop, it just works. It's very nice to have that elephant off your back, right? Someone else fixed the responsive stuff, and I don't need to care about whatever breakpoints in the CSS. Any questions so far? It makes sense? Talk faster, slower? No? All right. So, and of course we can handle events. We can click our nice little bars here and actually dig out the value of that bar if we want to know. So there are plenty of functionality on these charts, but I'm just scratching the surface of what they can do. So as you can see, there are very few controls that you actually need to define. So yeah, I mean, Kendo chart at the topmost level, Kendo chart series, and then series item, and so on. It's very easy to get started with. You can just copy-paste from the Kendo UI set. He said copy-paste about code. You don't copy-paste code, right? Only from Stack Overflow, am I right? Yeah, that's what I thought. Drop-downs. There are plenty of drop-downs, of course. The autocomplete we all know and love and hate it. I'm not sure which. The main idea with an autocomplete is that it helps you to filter down your options, right? You start off with a very, very long list. You don't want the user to scroll through all 50 countries or whatever you have in that list, but you start typing and it gets filtered. It works very nicely. I have something else called a combo box. That was the first thing I thought when I saw this, is like, combo box drop-down list. I don't think I know the difference, but I'm going to tell you in case you're wondering. There is a difference. So with the combo box, you have an input field, right? And you have a long list of things, and you can actually type manually, for example, the word football, and it will select it right away. But it's not, in the beginning, in the default mode, it's not actually like an autocomplete. But if you use something called a suggest, it will actually filter itself down, just like the autocomplete. So, yeah, very similar components. And the last one being the drop-down, and the drop-down doesn't have this input ability here. It's just a drop-down, and you have to actively select something. You can't type at this point. It's up to you which one you want to use. And of course we got a multi-select here. I didn't think there was a point showing it, because what you're essentially doing is just select several items in the list. And of course, installation. Drop-downs. Not a surprise, right? And we're not surprised that we have a few dependencies as well on the I10 that I mentioned a few times already, and the fact that we rely on animations. And to use it, we have the drop-downs module, and as all the previous ones that I talked about, you have import everything. Uh-oh. That didn't happen. Move away from my computer. All right. I think it's going to go well. What do you think? Otherwise, you're going to see me going. All right, you are away. So we have a drop-downs module here, right? And as I was saying, you can actually import a specific one. In this case, I've chosen only the autocomplete module, which you can do. So using it is like this. We assign a data property to our Kendo autocomplete, and we see here that we use this filter change, because that's really what we want out of it, right? We have an autocomplete control. We have a very, very long list, and we try to narrow it down. So we want on every key up, pretty much, we want to do a filter, which we are doing down here. So here we're saying, aha, some kind of filter happened, and we want to take the input and make sure that we don't care about uppercase or lowercase, and just see, do I actually find this item that I've started to type in here? This is a very big screen, by the way. So yeah, I think you get the idea, right? Long list, filter it down, have a few less options, and suddenly you have the one that you want to select. All right. And as you see here, the result is when I start typing in L, I get some, well, nice and less nice people. If you know Star Wars. A grid. There's nothing to be said about the grid really than, you know, it's there in a business application. If you like UIs, you're not going to be super excited about a grid, but you're probably more excited about the graph. I can actually see something, right? We all love Excel. No? Just me? Oh, okay. No, I don't love Excel. I'm just trying to provoke you guys. Sorry. So imagine you have a grid here. The grid has a few headers. It has some rows in it. And we have expectations on the grid. We want it to be able to data bind to it. We want to be able to filter, grouping, paging, sorting, and so on. Especially paging if it's a very long grid, right? And sorting, well, it comes with a territory. Otherwise, they might use Excel. So Let's move away from Excel and into our nice domain. And to install and use that thing, oh wow. Alright, I'm actually going to copy paste this from the Telerik homepage. No, wait, they're called progress now. Is it for me? No worries. Just checking, could be for me. Right, so a bunch of dependencies here, and yeah, quite a few. But it's a grid, right? So it makes sense there are a few dependencies, especially the Kendo drawing. We're doing like custom drawing. We have data queries, another nice library I'm going to talk about later. We've got date inputs, normal inputs, drop-downs, and the grid itself, and something nice here called Excel export at the bottom. We like that. Free exports for the people. Alright, so to use it, we just import the grid module and all these guys, right? Okay, so what about the grid itself? Of course, there should be grid data. Make it pageable, make it sortable, filterable, groupable, and down here we have a bunch of headers in our grid. And of course, those header names are referring to what the data looks like. So imagine that you got JSON data with these properties. So that's how it, matches the column head and knows where to put where. All right, and our grid here on the right has a few rows, columns, and so on. And as you can see, the comparison here is quite interesting. It's very advanced. You have contains, is equal to, ends with, is null. You get all of this out from scratch, or out of the box, as it's called. With you only doing this and make sure to specify data source. So that's pretty impressive. Layout. Well, you don't do so much with layout, but these are more like menu controls, if you know what I mean. We have a panel bar and a tab strip, so these two are different. If you look at the panel bar here, you see that it acts like an accordion, but really not, right? Because we used an accordion when we click it, that it closes something else. But in this case, you can just expand everything, but you can also close everything if you want to. Oh yeah, and it's also pretty advanced, because you can actually nest items in here. So items might have children, and children might have children, and so on. So the whole family in there. And the tab strip here to the right is just a normal tab. So it's still very nice to have some kind of component support for us, so we're able to easily lay out our components. Installation and usage. A few less dependencies this time. Just the Angular layout and our usual suspects. And yeah, the layout module, that's the only one. And of course, if we want the panel bar module, we have to dig that out of the two possible modules. So what about this? Let's look at the Kendo panel bar here, what's happening. So here we are actually nesting content. We are specifying, first off, the first level content here, called the first item. I think I need a binocular to see it. First item, and we have a second item, and under the second item we actually have a child item as being displayed here in the UI. And we see here that we specify our children's property. We see something else that's interesting as well. We have a few other properties here on the first level of things. We'll talk about that next. Which is what? So far we have title, of course, we expect that. Content, we expect that one as well. And we got expanded, so we can give it some init state to decide whether it's expanded or collapsed when we render it the first time. And of course, yeah, and children. This one enables us to almost build like a tree-like component, because children might have children and so on. Pop-ups. These should not be confused with modules. A pop-up in this case is what you see next to an element. Alright, so this is not a modal, it shouldn't have a dark background, but it should just appear next to an element and give you some kind of clue on what is this thing. Imagine a help scenario. What is this button, or what is this label? What does it represent? So it will position a piece of content next to a specific component. Or that's the default. So it's not a modal, I'm going to say that again, not a modal. Installation and usage, yeah, Angular pop-up, we expect that. Pop-up module, and yeah. So the component itself. This is the default, how we usually do it. So in a button here, we create a view reference, so we on line 2 here with the Kendo pop-up, we can actually attach it to an anchor property through a one-way binding. This allows us to actually place our pop-up next to the button, or whatever element. It might be a label, or it might be a div, or whatever, right? So imagine that the UI element exists over here, it's the anchor, and then you say, show pop-up, then it will actually show it up here. And of course, it can be shown on the top, at the bottom, to the left, and to the right. Right? But of course, you don't have to show it next to an element. You can actually take an offset instead. So in this case, we actually place it in an absolute position on the page. So it's good that we have options. It might not be an element, it might just be a position in the page. I'm going to do another attempt of not killing my computer here. Winning. Right. Alright, let's have a look at the pop-up service, because that also exists. There might be cases when we don't want to, show the template like we did with like a hidden, and we have a boolean that says whether to show it or not. We might actually want to do it programmatically, and we might not want to declare everything like we did. So for that reason, we have a pop-up service that we can inject here. And in that pop-up service, we can define the template, and we can define the offset or whatever options that we want. So it's nice that we have such a service. So define the template, set up the template and options in code, and then call open in code, instead of toggling the visibility. This gives us a lot more control. Dialog, also known as a modal. So this is the one that you probably thought of first. Dark background, we have this modal that should show us actions. It's actually voluntary. You don't have to have a yes or no or even close option. You can just do it with the keyboard or mouse. Nice modal, nice background. It will be responsive, and that saves you a lot of time. We can give it a title, we can give it a content, and optional action buttons at the bottom. Install and usage. Yay, we love those screens, right? Kendo Angular dialog and a few dependencies, the dialog module, and that's pretty much it when it comes to how to import it. How to use it though? It's pretty simple when you start out. I mean, we create our Kendo dialog, we give it a title. Okay. Bit boring modal, right? We just give it a title and nothing else. So no purpose in life, really. But of course, you can give it more. So we specify our Kendo dialog and we give it a bunch of HTML. So at this point, we have something that lacks action buttons, right? We don't have yes, okay, or cancel, or whatever here. We just have the title, the email, and probably signing up to some fishy email campaign, I think. Yeah, don't do that. All right, so, and of course we got the third option of this when we have action buttons. The only thing we need to do, of course, is to take the former example where we had the title and the content and add the buttons to it. So in this case, we have delete and cancel. So we just need a Kendo dialog actions and X number of Kendo buttons in there, and it just lays it out nicely. Make sense? Yeah, and you also need coffee. Date inputs. Ooh, yeah, now we're talking. Now we're talking forms, right? Form inputs. We got the nice little date input where we are forcing them to be, let's see here. Is this UK or US? I can never remember, right? I live in the UK, so I should remember, but I'm not from there. So we got the date picker, of course, and you have a nice little button that will display a calendar here to the right, but of course, as we are used to in Bootstrap, we can display calendar as is. We also have a time picker, which is nice. Yeah, and all of these controls are very, very nice and handy that they exist for us, of course, with a nice, consistent theming. Installation and usage, date inputs, and a few other dependencies, date inputs, and of course, if we don't want all the controls, we do calendar module. I think you know the drill by now, right? And Kendo calendar is pretty easy to just show. So in this case, we are showing a disabled calendar. Can you actually see this? Yeah, great. So yes, you can disable the calendar totally if you want to. Why you ever should want that, but you can. Let's take a more advanced calendar. So in this case, we have two different visual situations. There is a difference between focused value versus selected value. I had to read an extra time to see what the difference actually was, but the focus value is about where your viewport is. So if you, let's say you say, in this case, 11th of December 2017, it's not actually going to mark it out, but it's going to open the calendar in that month. Versus a selected value, then it's actually going to mark it red. So there is a difference. And we have a lot of different inputs. So yes, with inputs and date inputs, we pretty much covered everything, and even with drop-downs, then we have our full form scenario. So we got the masked text box, we have a numeric text box, a slider, that's the one there with the red indicator, we have a text box, and we got a color picker. So we have quite a few nice controls if your customer is being very creative and say, yeah, I don't want an input field, I want something else that's very exotic. Yes? Masked text box and date and time picker. Okay, so you imagine yourself having like a custom input on a date, and you want. Good question. I'll bring that to the product team. Mm-hmm. Hackish, or yeah. So I know for now that their focus is on supporting Kendo for Vue properly. So I know they're super busy with that before doing new stuff like this. I can raise it again and say it's important. Yes. Yeah. You are right. I'm trying to remember whether this one was masked or not.
Yeah, it is.
It is. Yeah. All right. Awesome. There you have your answer. Shall we go back to that slide maybe and see? It was a few slides back. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So we have a date picker, right? That's what you said. Date input. Aha, you mean the one on the top, right? But you want a combination of date input, masking, and the calendar.
That's also for the daytime pickers. The date picker uses date input.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. No, I was just wondering about the masked capability there.
It allows you to put in numbers only.
Sorry?
It allows you to put numbers only. When you're typing, you can type only values.
All right. But I guess you want more customized ability, right? You want to do slashes, hyphens, and whatever. Yeah. Have a look whether this one solves your problem, right? So, and if it doesn't, we'll raise an issue. Thanks for the question, by the way. I think I stepped on something. You still hear me, right? Where were we? Right, we got the inputs module, and as usual, we can take everything or we can take specific ones. And of course, we have the masking capability, which is very interesting. In its simplest form, we could just give it a mask like this with hyphens or dash in between, and this actually stops the input from happening here. So that's nice. It not only reconfigures the input that we look at, but it's actually not allowing. So imagine that this was shorter. Imagine that this one said 8 characters. Then we wouldn't actually be able to type more than 8 characters, which is a nice added capability of it. And of course, the masking can be quite interesting. It could be with a regex. So you can pretty much mask whatever you want to mask with this kind of freedom. Sortables, or drag and drop, we can call those. So what this one does is that it displays a list of things, and you are able to rearrange the items in the list with the drag and drop functionality. So yeah, that's could be pretty useful. I'll show you some more advanced scenarios of this one as well. And yeah, per usual, it's the Angular sortable, and we have the sortable module. And let's go to the actual example. So we're doing two things here. We are assigning items as a data source to this, but we're also defining something called disabled indexes, because we might have a scenario where we actually don't want everything to be a drop target. In some cases, we actually want to disable certain items. So yes, there will show up a symbol like a plus sign that says, yes, you can actually drop it here. And in the cases they are disabled, you won't have that. So that's nice. Upload. How many here needs help with uploading files to the backend? Are you using components currently? Yeah, that's painful, right? It's all about empathy. That's why we create this, and making money. Well, yeah. So imagine that you're selecting a file, right? And you want to help to select that file, and you want some kind of hookup towards the backend so you can upload the file. And that's exactly what we're offering, but of course we got the upload module, and we got the dependency here on some kind of HTTP, which makes sense. You wouldn't be able to upload a file without that. So in this case, I think you can use HTTP client, the new one in Angular, or the old one, HTTP. You need one of them, regardless, and the upload module, of course. Uploading is an interesting story. The first thing we do in this control is to select the file. Once we have selected the file, we have some functionality here that reads some metadata from the file, and if possible, assigns it to an image preview. So in this case, we're able to see what the file looked like, in case we actually selected the wrong file from our file system. Of course, that only works if your target is an image in the first place, right? But it's pretty nice. After you do that, the second step you take is to press upload. When you press upload, it will try to do a post against the upload save URL that you gave it. So that's very, very nice, and very little code to achieve uploading capabilities. Data query. So this one is not really a UI component at all, but it's more like a utility library that allows you to do sorting, filtering, grouping, aggregation, and so on. And yeah, I mean, you could argue that it's replacing Lodash. Not really, because Lodash is enormous, but certain parts of it. So if you don't want that dependency, then if you have this one, you can get some basic functionality that Kendo itself relies on. So here, for example, you have different kind of data that you want to dig out. So we can use operator that says start with, and we can say what value, whether to ignore uppercase, lowercase, and here we got another operator equals, and so on. And the end result is us being able to select a piece of data, or a piece of meat, as it says. All right. Kendo drawing. I mentioned this in the beginning of the presentation, but it's actually quite useful to have your own library, because in some cases you're happy with a button or label or the graph or whatever it's trying to render, but imagine that you want to draw this custom thing. It could be several images or a video or, you know, custom text. So taking control of the canvas, pretty much. You can do this with Kendo drawing. What does that look like? So of course, the Kendo drawing library, and let's just jump to how to do it. So here we have a component, and we define a view reference surface here. So this is from the component side. So this surface object, we're able to take it. We are able to dig out a native element by doing the view child bit here, and we put that into the surface create, this static method. It just takes our native element, and of course, when we have all that, we can define what our scene should look like, which is this. So imagine that you have the freedom in the world, right? You could draw a path, you could draw an image from a URL, as you can see here. We can just display text wherever we want it. We can, of course, create a group and put all of those things in there and place it wherever we want with this translation commando, and then just draw it at the bottom here. Very powerful stuff to just mix and match the way you want it. Or you can, of course, use HTML and CSS if you find that you're Jedis in CSS. We are, right? Yeah, I've been working the front end for 3-4 years, and I can tell you it's still painful. At least now we have Flexbox, right? Anyone using Flexbox? A few hands. And you know of the less pain that they gave us, right? So, in summary for this talk, consider if your project is in a time crunch and consider whether you have the budget to buy a component library like this, of course. It has 3 different themes, but there is a theme creator that comes with this, so you can easily create your own. It supports a bunch of UI components, data queries, and even exports to Excel and PDF. And it helps you with posting files, deleting files against the backend, which is pretty nice. I think that row is twice, or I'm drunk. Yeah. Internationalization, of course, and a ton more controls. I just show you 1 control per category, but I'm telling you, go explore this thing. It's not like it's with the other, packages with controls. You can actually do a lot of npm install and just figure out for yourself for the longest time before you actually buy it, if you buy it. So further reading is, of course, the official documentation and this little GitHub repo that I prepared for you guys, so you can just take it for a spin, and it demos most of your controls. Thank you so much for listening. Do you have any immediate questions? Oh, a few hands. All right. Yes? You mean this install I'm doing? Or?
Yeah, I mean, if you download the open source version,
Mm-hmm.
and because it has fewer, a subset of the components, would these able work with the whole
Yeah, I think it's just a subset, so they should be working with the core libraries, yes. Thanks for the question. Any more questions? All right, I'll be here for a few more hours before the conference is at its end, so thanks again for listening.